Good evening. I'm delighted to be here. First, I can honestly tell you that no event in my life this year has brought me more heartfelt pleasure than preparing to give this speech today. As an Edinburgh Festival virgin, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but you'll be pleased to hear that I have done my homework before sitting down and writing a single word. And the relief for all of you is that I am not someone with an important job in broadcasting using this speech to audition for an even more important job in broadcasting. I read a few. Now, since in the history of the MacTaggart Lecture, no actor has ever been asked to give this speech, I also won't be spending any time justifying why I'm giving this speech. If what I say today is responsible, I alone am responsible for saying it. And if the MacTaggart were a political office that you actually had to run for, then the banner hanging over this lectern would not be that one. It would be my campaign slogan and theme for today, and that would read, "It's the creatives, stupid." Now, when I think about what the MacTaggart Lecture was like 40 years ago and what it was like for this industry, I imagine that the audience then probably went home at the end of the festival and shared that time-honored tradition when the entire family would gather around the television set, tune to a certain channel at a certain time, and watch a favorite movie like It's a Wonderful Life. And they probably felt blessed to be living in such a modern age with a 21-inch television that brought the family together. Today, when I think about how all of you might go home after the festival, you can sense that things are a little bit different now than they were then. It's more likely you've already recorded It's a Wonderful Life on your DVR as you gamely try to gather the family around the giant movie screen that you've installed in what used to be the garage. Then you can try to find out where your children are on Facebook. You might ask your partner to stop Instagramming photos during the movie of the meal that they've just ordered from the delivery service, while grandma desperately pins even more pictures of cats on her Pinterest page, as your son quietly and surreptitiously clears his entire browser history, and your daughter tweets how boring It's a Wonderful Life is because it's not in 3D or even in color. You too will feel that warm family glow of precious time when we all come together to basically ignore each other. It is indeed a more complicated, modern, and wonderful life, isn't it? So a bit of cautious humor as I begin my comments today. And I want to share with you a couple of experiences that I've had in television that profoundly changed my view of this medium, and are some of the influences that perhaps led to my doing House of Cards with Netflix, one of the primary reasons, if not the only reason, I was asked to speak today. Now, I was lucky. My parents loved literature and the arts, and as a young child, I got taken to the theater all the time. And I was also captivated by television. I mean, we loved to sit as a family and watch Upstairs, Downstairs, or The Wild Wild West, which was my personal favorite, crowded around our set for the latest episodes. Television showed me a world beyond my own neighborhood. It introduced me to people I had never met, places I had never seen. It fired my imagination, just like theater and books had. And I was not a studious kid, so I struggled to find things that would command my attention and engage my ideas and my energies. But I knew that I loved stories and drama. I'd even sat down with a school friend and drew on a napkin in a restaurant the plans for a theater that we dreamed of opening one day, a theater that we would name Trigger Street after the street that my friend lived on. Well, as it turns out, I did eventually get to run a theater, the Old Vic, and I saved the name Trigger Street for my production company. So I am one very lucky guy because I have been able to live out my dreams almost perfectly as I look back on it now, that you'd think I would have made it up. But in fact, it was a teacher who I had met, and he had an idea on how to engage young people, and that person saved me. You see, it turns out that I was drawn to acting at a very young age, and this smart drama teacher pushed me toward a workshop where I was blessed to meet the man who would become my mentor, the great actor Jack Lemmon. And at this workshop that Mr. Lemmon was running in 1974, we had to do scenes from Juno and the Peacock, which he was performing at the MacTaggart Forum at that time in Los Angeles. And after I finished doing my scene, Jack Lemmon walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "That was a touch of terrific." He said, "No, I'm not kidding. That was terrific. You're a terrific young actor." He was connected to the emotional stuff in the play. I mean, this is what I've been talking about, kids. You should go to New York and you should study because you're a born actor. Now, mind you, I was 13 years old. So after graduating from high school, I took Mr. Lemmon's advice. I went to New York and I studied theater at the Juilliard School of Drama. And then later, I got the chance to audition to play Jack's alcoholic son in the Broadway production of Long Day's Journey into Night. So in 1986, 12 years after I first met him, I found myself in a room with Jack Lemmon, and after I finished my audition, we had to do like 4 scenes together. Once again, Jack Lemmon walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I never thought we'd find the rotten kid, but you're it. Jesus Christ, what the hell was that?" I spent the next year working alongside Jack every night, including our run here in London at the Haymarket. And he became the most important mentor, father figure, and friend I could have ever hoped to have had. We did 3 films together, ending with Glengarry Glen Ross, which he used to like to call Gene Barry Glenn Close, because it was easier to say. Now, the reason I told you this story, fast forward to 1990. Jack Lemmon invites me to sit at his table at the American Film Institute Lifetime Achievement Award to Sir David Lean. And 2 things you should know. 1, Sir David Lean directed Lawrence of Arabia. And 2, if you don't know who Sir David Lean is, you're in the wrong business. Now, I remember being on the edge of my seat as Mr. Lean dedicated his entire acceptance speech to the idea of promoting and supporting emerging talents. It turns out that he was concerned, perhaps even frightened, about the film industry's lack of commitment to developing talent, and the greater and greater number of films that the studios were making that appealed only to the pulse and not to the mind. And this is part of what he said that night in 1990 in front of all of Hollywood. "I find myself thinking that nearly everything that Noel Coward and I used to talk about in doing new things, and nearly everything I learned in those early days, seems to be contradicted today. We don't come out of many new holes anymore. We try to go back and come out of the old ones, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I think it's terribly, terribly sad. I mean, all right, go ahead, do the 1, 2, 3, 4, but don't make it a staple diet. This business lives on creative pathfinders. And I terribly miss, we all miss, I think, somebody like the great producer Irving Thalberg. He had a foot in both camps. He understood us creative people, but he also understood the money people. And we are in terrible danger. I think there are some wonderful new storytellers coming up now. They're going to be our future. Please, you money chaps in the money department, remember what they are. I think the time has come where the money people can afford to lose a little by taking risks with these new filmmakers. And then Lean said the following: "I think if they give these new storytellers encouragement, we're going to come up and up and up in the film business. And if we don't, we're going to go down and down and down and lose it all to television." Television will take over. David Lean said that in 1990, and hold on to that thought because I'll come back to it. The second experience I want to tell you about is when I made my first trip to Los Angeles as a working actor in 1987, after having studied at Juilliard and then having begun my career as a theater actor. I was offered a reoccurring role on the CBS series Wise Guy. Do you guys remember that show? Absolutely not. Anyway, I immediately turned it down. And at this point now, I had only experienced 2 guest starring parts in episodics. One in The Equalizer with Edward Woodward, remember that one? And the other on Crime Story. Now, the experience and the performances that I gave in both of these shows was frankly forgettable. I was an unknown theater actor who'd never worked in front of a camera before, but I understood story, and I understood arc, and I knew how to create a character, and I wondered who all these guys were standing around the cameras in suits. I mean, asking, you know, why my hair was that way, or why I was wearing that tie, or why I was acting that way. These weren't the directors or the writers. These were network people. I see network people. Sticking their fingers in every creative decision and having opinions about everything. And even though I was just starting out, I already knew that I didn't want that kind of experience as a steady diet. So I turned down this offer to do Wise Guy. And when my agents and manager began to scream at me, who the hell do you think I was? I picked up a phone and I called Jack Lemmon. Because I remembered that during Long Day's Journey into Night, he often talked about when he first started out as an actor in television in the 1950s. He often said that those were the golden years. And we've all heard that phrase, the golden age. And I was being pressured to accept this role, and I wondered, what did he actually mean by that phrase? I mean, was he just being nostalgic, or was there something different about the way television was back then? So I called him, and he said to me, you have to understand, kid, that television was brand new back then. I mean, it was a new medium, and nobody really knew if it was going to last. So you could try anything. Comedy one week, a drama the next, a musical. I mean, it was terrific. It hadn't been commercialized yet, and no one knew if it was even going to be around that long. There was this sense of total abandon. Total abandon. Now, that was not a phrase that I had ever associated with television, but now it makes sense. When I learned that James MacTaggart, in addition to being a dynamic creative force, was also in his personal life a volunteer parachutist in the Scottish Battalion. I mean, he was choosing willingly to jump into space, taking a leap of faith, and his work reflects that sense of abandon, which is why we honor his memory today. And so it struck me that was exactly what I needed to apply. Total abandon in order to tackle a character that would be memorable and have an experience that would be lasting. So I sat down with Stephen J. Cannell, the producer, and he promised that I would have total freedom to create this role of Mel Prophet. So I took the part, and it turned into a very satisfying experience. I did 7 episodes, and then they killed me off. Now, Brett Martin, in his new book, Difficult Men, a behind-the-scenes look at the past 15 years of what he calls the third golden age of television, cites a very revealing story about what creatives have had to deal with since the beginning of this medium. When the hit series Hill Street Blues was about to premiere in 1980, NBC sent an internal memo to writer-showrunner Stephen Bochco with a list of their concerns following a focus group testing of that program. The most prevalent audience reaction indicated that the program was depressing, violent, and confusing. Too much was crammed into the story. The main characters are perceived as not being capable and having flawed personalities. Professionally, they were never completely successful in doing their jobs, and personally, their lives were a mess. Audiences found the ending unsatisfying, too many loose ends, etc., etc. Now, in other words, this memo was an entirely unwitting blueprint for not only what made Hill Street Blues such a historic program, but for all the shows that make up this third golden age. If those executives had had their way, the road would have never been paved for The Sopranos, Rescue Me, Homeland, 6 Feet Under, Dexter, Damages, Sons of Anarchy, Oz, The Wire, True Blood, Boardwalk Empire, Mad Men, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, and House of Cards. And if the list I just read of those programs is not the most powerful, inescapable evidence that the king of television is the creatives, then I don't know what would convince you. You can applaud. And our challenge now is to keep the flame of this revolutionary programming alive by continuing to seek out new talent. Nurture it, encourage it, give it a home, and the kind of autonomy that the past and present of our 3 golden ages of television have proved it deserves. I don't think we do it enough. And I, like David Lean, am disappointed. Disappointed this industry doesn't do more to support new talent. And just because I've achieved success in my own career doesn't mean that I'm not also disappointed in myself. Disappointed that I haven't done better, that my work hasn't always stood up to the challenge or the time. I want to do better. I want to produce better stories. I want to do better plays. I want to encourage the best of storytellers, the new ones coming up, because I believe that sending the elevator back down, Jack Lemmon's philosophy that he passed on to me, is a great way that we can all use success to benefit others. And because I feel this way, I wonder how many of you sitting out there share this feeling. Despite how things might be going for you, despite your own success, are you still disappointed in your own reach, your own bar of excellence, your own ambitions, your own creative courage, your own ability to use this medium, these platforms, so that it brings out the best in yourself and the best in those you work alongside? And I wonder if you are, as I am, disappointed that this medium doesn't always reach for the highest of excellence as much as it should or could. I suspect that more will be said about talent this weekend than maybe anything else. I mean, we all know that that's what it's always been about, creative talent, right? And I'm not just talking about emerging talents, because talent can come from anywhere and anyone. Although usually there is a focus on young talent, age is not a barrier to great stories and great ideas. Talent comes in all sizes and shapes, and we should be open to those who have great experience and those with no experience. Now, granted, it's also true that there's a good deal of undiscovered talent that remains undiscovered for a reason. But we all know when we come across a talent that does have the it factor, and that's what I'm talking about. Now, until now, those of us in the television and film business have been able to wait for the talent to find us. We had the keys to the kingdom, and folks needed to bring us their stories if they wanted to find a route to an audience. But now, things are changing, and changing fast. Kids aren't growing up with a sense that television is the aspirational place for their ideas. All they know is the incredible diversity of entertainment, stories, and engagement that they can find online. And if they do love a show on Netflix or Apple TV, you can bet they probably don't know which network originally aired it. So how do we find these kids? Well, when I took over the Old Vic a decade ago, the way we did it was we created a program called Old Vic New Voices, our program to support those entering this industry as a career. And instead of separating them, like many theaters and television and film programs do, training writers separately or putting directors on a specific course, we wanted to bring them together because I believe that's how drama is made. We united writers, producers, directors, and actors and helped them learn to collaborate, to develop and produce and realize their work together. Now, it was an experiment, but creatively fulfilling, and it's turned into such a success that, as one example, 28 productions at the Edinburgh Fringe this year, 28 will have been written, directed, produced, or performed by alumni of the Old Vic New Voices program. But we wanted to go further. We felt we had a social responsibility to our neighborhood, so we created community plays. We went out to every school, community group, center, youth group, and invited them in to the Old Vic. We built a creative sanctuary for kids who found it hard to communicate, where a traditional education was uninspiring, or who struggled in their relationships with their peers. And I can only tell you this: it is incredibly satisfying to hear from teachers that the boy who has never been able to concentrate in class suddenly has a sense of focus, or the girl wrestling now with her own how to express herself has the words finally. And here's my absolute conviction. This kind of program for young people is not just about whether they decide to go into the arts or not. It's not just about finding the next generation of David Leans or Stephen Bochco's. It's also about our society. I believe culture is not a luxury item, it is a necessity. Storytelling helps us understand each other, translate the issues of our time, and the tools of theater and film can be powerful in helping young people to develop communication, collaboration skills, let alone improving on their own sense of confidence. And look, for those who do have a passion for the arts and have a voice, I believe it is a responsibility we have to seek them out. Because if we don't, they may never find their way over the walls that we built so effectively around our theaters, our networks, and our studios, and we may lose their stories forever. Oh, and by the way, I said a little while ago that my first job in television was doing those episodics. That's not actually true. When I was writing this speech, I remembered that my very first job in television happened when I was 17 years old. I had a summer job where we were picked up in a truck in the San Fernando Valley in California, thrown into the back of this flatbed with about 8 other guys, and they were driven out to Orange County and given a map of an area of a neighborhood, and we had to go door to door to sell on subscription television. It was one of the first pay cable systems, and I kid you not, but our opening line had to be, "Hi, have you turned on yet?" Yeah. A lot of doors got slammed in my face, I can tell you that. But, you know, who knew? I was being innovative about television even as far back as 1976. Now, if there is anything about the character that I play on House of Cards, Francis Underwood, that I suspect people might admire, is that he too has embraced a sense of total abandonment to the rules. He has no allegiances to party, to titles, to forms, to names, to labels. He doesn't care whether it's Democrats or Republicans, ideology or conviction. What he sees is opportunity and the chance to move forward. Okay, yes, so he's also a little diabolical, but you know, he's very, very effective. So, like Francis, I've come here today with no ideology. I'm not viewing today's event as a television event. It seems to me that since audiences are no longer making those kind of distinctions, why should we? So let's throw out the labels, or as Francis might say, at least let's broaden the definitions. And if we have to call ourselves anything, then aren't we all just storytellers? Now, House of Cards, creatively, actually follows the model more often employed here in Great Britain. The television industry here has never really embraced the pilot season looked to by the networks in the United States as a worthwhile effort. And now look, of course, we went out to all the major networks with House of Cards, and every single one was interested in the idea, but every single one wanted us to do a pilot first. And look, it wasn't out of arrogance that David Fincher and Beau Willimon and I were not interested in having to audition the idea. It was that we wanted to start to tell a story that would take a long time to tell. We were creating a sophisticated, multi-layered story with complex characters who would reveal themselves over time, and relationships that would need space to play out. And the obligation, of course, of doing a pilot, from the writing perspective, is that you have to spend about 45 minutes establishing all the characters and create arbitrary cliffhangers and basically generally prove that what you're setting out to do is going to work. Netflix was the only network that said, "We believe in you. We've run our data, and it tells us that our audience would watch the series. We don't need you to do a pilot. How many do you want to do?" And we were like, 2 seasons? Now, by comparison, last year, 113 pilots were made. 35 of those were chosen to go to air. 13 of those were renewed, but most of those are gone now. And this year, 146 pilots were shot. 56 have gone to series, but we don't know the outcome of those yet. But the cost of these pilots was somewhere between $300 and $400 million a year. That makes our House of Cards deal for 2 seasons look really cost-effective. I know you're here, Netflix. I know you're here. Now, clearly the success of the Netflix model, releasing the entire season of House of Cards at once, proved one thing. The audience wants the control. They want the freedom. If they want to binge, as they've been doing on House of Cards and lots of other shows, then we should let them binge. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have stopped me on the street and said, "Thanks, you sucked 3 days out of my life." And through this new form of distribution, we have demonstrated that we have learned the lesson that the music industry didn't learn. Give people what they want, when they want it, in the form they want it in, at a reasonable price, and they'll more likely pay for it rather than steal it. Well, some will still steal it, but I think we can take a bite out of piracy. All right, so we get what the audiences want. They want quality. We get what the talent wants, artistic freedom. And the only way to protect talent and the quality of our work is to be innovative. And we also get what the corporations want, what the studios want, what the networks want. They want to make money. And we need them to be profitable so that they can continue to fund high-quality production. They want the highest possible audiences with the greatest impact. We get it. We all get it. The challenge is, can we create an environment where executives who live in data and numbers are emboldened and empowered to support our mission? To have an environment that leadership will take risks, willing to experiment, be prepared to fail, aiming higher rather than playing it safe. It's like Steve Jobs. Why did he continually cite Henry Ford as an inspiration? Because Ford anticipated that people didn't know that they needed or wanted a car until he invented one. And we didn't know that we needed and wanted all that Apple has brought our lives until Steve Jobs put it in our laps or put it in our hands. We need to be that innovative. And in some ways, we need to be better than the audience. We need to surprise, break boundaries, and take viewers to new places. We need to give them better and better quality. We might not disrupt the status quo overnight, but we can mold structures at the center of our businesses, because if we really, truly put talent at the heart of everything we do, we might just be able to have greater highs across a broader spectrum of this industry. That's what I believe. You guys were so quiet for a while. I'm very glad you did that. Now, bringing us right up to date, we've just seen the release of the 5th and final season of Breaking Bad, capturing a huge audience and sending the media world into a frenzy of excitement about the Netflix effect. But this example also teaches us, I believe, a very important lesson for the networks, and it's about patience. A much overlooked quality needed in creative development, and not a virtue found by a rule in executives, hidebound for decades by pressure to find surefire hits quickly. Breaking Bad was a slow starter ratings-wise, and its biggest gains came after the series debuted on Netflix in late 2011. And early viewers of the network airings helped spread word, giving more awareness than those first season rating numbers suggested, while the Netflix streaming and clever scheduling of repeats by AMC began to win more fans and build anticipation. AMC believed in that show, even though they only originally gave it something like 6 or 7 episode order, because Mad Men had taught them that shows can take time to find an audience. And positive buzz and quality of audience were as important as sheer numbers when building a brand. And what Breaking Bad's rather late in life explosion in audience teaches us is that these shows need to be treated as assets to be nurtured, protected from the quick network trigger that can bail on a show before it has had a chance to find its feet. I mean, after all, The Sopranos audience took 4 seasons to reach its apex. Seinfeld took a nearly 5-year route to big-time ratings. Its first 4 seasons didn't even make it into the Nielsen Top 30. And it requires guts to stick with a show when the numbers don't come. Courage to not buckle under the pressure from the executive floor. But history proves that a commitment to ideas and keeping faith in the talent has to be preferable to a pilot system that just throws everything up on the wall and hope that something sticks. If the audience is bonding to a show, no matter how small that audience is to begin with, isn't it worth investing the time to help it find its true potential? And if that means ripping up the rule book and scheduling in a different way or playing with windows to build excitement and availability, then we should be prepared to try anything. It takes every artistic medium a number of decades to find its footing and to find its being recognized as a legitimate art form. Novels weren't taken seriously at first because they weren't poetry. Photography was seen as inferior to painting for its first 50 years. It took decades for film to graduate from cheap Nickelodeon entertainment for the masses to something considered a fine art form. Buster Keaton is now seen as a genius, but at the time was a vaudevillian clown in the flickers. And as for David Lean, no one paid any attention to his warning in 1990. No one took him seriously that night. The film industry didn't believe that television could ever become its biggest competitor. And yet, it would only be 8 years later that The Sopranos would debut on HBO. And the tide of actors, writers, directors, and producers seeking and finding a more fertile playground than the film industry was offering them would begin. And I do not think that anyone today, 15 years later, in terms of character-driven drama, can argue that television has not indeed taken over. So it's really only in the last 15 years that television has finally been seen as a legitimate art form, mostly because these pioneers in cable took chances, and those stories found audiences thirsting for more sophisticated narratives and characters than the movie theaters were offering them. And the warp speed of technological advancement, the internet, streaming, multi-platforming, happens to have coincided with the recognition of television as an art form. So you have this incredible confluence of a medium just coming into its own as technology for that medium is drastically shifting. Studios and networks who ignore either shift, whether the increasing sophistication of storytelling or the constantly shifting sands of technological advancement, will be left behind. And if they fail to hear these warnings, audiences will evolve faster than they will. And they will seek out stories and content providers who give them what they demand. Complex, smart stories available whenever they want, on whatever device they want, wherever they want. Netflix and other similar services have succeeded because they have married good content with forward-thinking approach to viewing habits and appetites. And the risk at this juncture is becoming too institutionalized, too schematic, thinking that something that's working now will work a year from now. The curse of success is that the stakes get higher. Careers are made, salaries increase, people have reputations and track records to protect. And the end result is a shift toward conservatism, away from risk-taking. And if there's one thing that overlaps between business and art, it's that in the long run, the risk-takers are rewarded. And one way that our industry might fail to adapt to the continually shifting sands is to keep a dogmatic differentiation in their minds between the various media, separating film, TV, miniseries, webisodes, or however you want to label these narrative formats. It's like when I'm working in front of a camera, that camera doesn't know it's a film camera or a TV camera or a streaming camera, it's just a camera. So I predict that in the next decade or two, any differentiation between these platforms will fall away. Is 13 hours watched as one cinematic whole really any different than a film? Do we define film as being something 2 hours or less? Surely it goes deeper than that. If you're watching a film on your television, is it no longer a film because you're not watching it in a theater? If you watch a TV show on your iPad, is it no longer a TV show? The device and the length are irrelevant. The labels are useless, except perhaps to agents and managers and lawyers who use these labels to conduct business deals. But for kids growing up now, there's no difference. Watching Avatar on an iPad or watching YouTube on a TV or watching Game of Thrones on their computer. It's all content. It's just story. To say nothing of the audience's attention span. I mean, for years, particularly with the advent of the internet, there's people griping about, lessening attention spans. But if someone can watch an entire season of a TV series in one day, doesn't that show an incredible attention span? Because when the story is good enough, people can watch something 3 times the length of an opera. What'd you do last weekend? We can make no assumptions about what viewers want or how they want to experience things. We must observe, adapt, and try things to discover appetites we didn't know were there. The more we try things, the more we will learn about viewership. The more doors will open both creatively and from a business perspective. You know, and there's been a lot of myth. It's been around for a while that nobody knows anything. That making good programming is just a crapshoot. But frankly, that's just bullshit. We do know how this works. And it's always been about empowering artists. It's always been about total abandon. It was that way when Jack Lemmon began. It was that way when Grant Tinker birthed the shows of the MTM studios. It was that way when HBO threw up its hands and thought, well, why not a show about an overweight mob boss in New Jersey who kills people but also suffers anxiety attacks? Why not? And for all of Netflix's big data and mathematical research, it was there when they opened the door to House of Cards. And boy, we got lucky in the creative department. Since Netflix had never done an original program before, they didn't even have an office to give us notes. Can you imagine the notes that we would have gotten if we'd been with a network that didn't support us artistically?
We're a little concerned that Kevin strangles a dog in the first 5 minutes of the series. We're afraid we're going to lose half our audience.
But we weren't asked to compromise or water down the story we wanted to tell by anyone. Not at Netflix, not at MRC, our production company. And that first scene creatively set the tone for the entire series. So we know what works. And the only thing we don't know is why is it so difficult to find executives with the fortitude, the wisdom, and the balls to do it. Because here's the thing, and it's good news. More than at any other time, and any other group gathered in the 37-year history of this lecture, you, in this hall today, are in a position to make it happen. To do both work that you can prosper from and go home proud of. Now, 15 years ago, I might not have been up here talking to you about this because television was considered a lost cause. Oh, frankly, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have been up here lecturing you because my agent would have never allowed me to do a TV series after winning an Oscar. Let alone something streaming. And to an unheard of degree, we are finally free from that hoary old shadow cast over television since its inception, the shadow of ratings. Not one of us in this room will ever see a 30 share in our lifetimes, and it's a wonderful, freeing thing. Netflix did it right and focused on the things that have replaced the dumb, raw numbers of the Nielsen world. They embraced targeted marketing and brand as a virtue higher than ratings. And the audience has spoken. They want stories. They're dying for them. They're rooting for us to give them the right thing. And they will talk about it, binge on it, carry it with them on the bus and to the hairdresser, force it on their friends, tweet, blog, Facebook, make fan pages, silly GIFs, and God knows what else about it. Engage with it with a passion and an intimacy that a blockbuster movie could only dream of. And all we have to do is give it to them. The prize fruit is right there, shinier and juicier than it's ever been before. So it will be all the more shame on each and every one of us if we don't reach out and seize it. The question is, how can we find more David Leans who will support the Trailblazers? More men and women in the money departments who understand how to nurture, liberate the next level of thrilling talent. Give them confidence so we can risk finding the new ideas. And right down through the history of entertainment, there have been leadership at networks, motion picture studios, and theater companies who understood the value of the creative community. Go as far back as you want, and the lessons are there for us to see. Whether it was during the heyday of the Hollywood studio system, the group of actors and directors that created United Artists, the hotbed of creative, extraordinary work out of the Royal Court Theatre in London in the 1950s, the great eras of BBC drama that changed the face of British television, the efforts at Granada Television during those years of remarkable output there, and the ability that HBO and its brave executives have shown in keeping the flame of artistic excellence alive these past 15 years. But crucially, those in the positions of leadership at all of those institutions also knew that these policies of supporting, nurturing, and protecting their creative communities was good for business. They found a way to make art and commerce come together and had the guts to fight for quality and for talent. But the new generation of creatives is different. We're no longer operating in a world where someone has to decide if they're an actor, writer, director, or producer. These days, kids growing up on YouTube can be all these things. And we have to persuade them that there is a home for them in the mainstream. But we also have to make space for those single-minded geniuses that just seem to have it all together, and all they need is a door to be opened, the Lena Dunhams of our world. Now, I would like to read to you the names of the future storytellers who will make their own thrilling contributions to our industry, but I can't because we don't know who they are yet. But you can be sure they're out there, working away online, cutting together a first student film, rehearsing in some basement theater trying to put on a new work, applying for an Arts Council grant, filming their own Funny or Die comedy sketch, or standing on this stage doing stand-up at this festival. And it strikes me that there is, at last, a space for this new wave of talent to occupy. It's not nearly as large a space as it could be, but the door is ajar and the windows are open. And it's going to be up to us to decide to invite them in. Just as I would not be standing here today or have had the career that I have had if Jack Lemmon hadn't put his hand on my shoulder at the age of 13 and gave me the confidence to seek out a career as an actor. We can all send the elevator back down. We just have to make sure the floors we live on are not so high that we can no longer hear the voices of those who just want to get on and come up, calling out for opportunity. Wherever they want to go in this new world, television and the internet surely cannot afford to lose them all. History will indeed be what we make of it. And with all that's at our fingertips, can we still find a way to gather together and share a more Frank Capra-like world? We all still crave shared experiences. But these days, the water cooler moment where people gathered at work to talk about what they'd seen on TV the night before has vanished. We no longer live in a world of appointment viewing. So the water cooler has gone virtual because now the discussion is online. And it's a sophisticated, no spoilers generation. And because of that, we need never be alone with our Breaking Bad habit or our crazy obsession with Dexter. And stories are the great leveler, capable of crossing borders to unite audiences. And when there is so much conflict in our world, as countries go to war, with so much that pulls us apart, it is culture that unites us. So we are still a family, a beautifully diverse global family. And the optimist in me would argue that maybe we just have to work a little bit harder these days to make sure that we actually share these experiences together and try not to ignore each other quite so much in this wonderful life. So I've tried to address the big questions that might have been on your mind today. And I hope that I have set the tone for the conversation as this festival gets underway. It has been an honor and a privilege to stand before you and give you some of my thoughts about talent, this industry, and these new platforms. And I want to leave you with the words of a man as good as any to address the nexus of commerce and art, Mr. Orson Welles, who once said, "I hate television. I hate it as much as peanuts. But I just can't stop eating peanuts." Thank you.